September 11, 2001. And what did Al-Qaeda do in Manhattan and in Washington and in the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania? They used the most crude means available to kill 3,000 people. They flew airplanes into buildings. And they counted on the impact and the explosion and the fire and the falling buildings to kill people, which is what happened. But if they'd had chemical or biological or nuclear supergis bomb technology, on that fateful day they would have killed multiples of 3,000 people. Imagine if Al-Qaeda had used chemical weapons in lower Manhattan, or, God forbid, biological weapons. They would have killed hundreds of thousands of people in Manhattan and in northern New Jersey. And those are mistakes for us. We live in a world where we're so connected to each other that we don't really fear states anymore as much as we fear small groups of individuals with evil in their hearts who just want to kill people to make a political statement. And that's what Osama bin Laden was all about. And so in a way, we escaped an even larger catastrophe because they didn't have chemical and biological and nuclear weapons. But guess what? The Obama administration revealed last week, President Obama and Secretary Clinton directly warned the dictator of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, we know you have chemical weapons, and if you use them, we're going to hold you accountable. So now we have a situation that we feared where terrorist groups in Syria, after the fall of Assad, might secure for themselves chemical weapons and use them against innocent people in Syria and in the Middle East. This is a dangerous world that we face, and that's the bad news for all of us today. Now, we can't rest just on the bad news because, as your city manager said, and I really admire what he said, Americans are we have a great country, and we're not going to fail, and we are going to succeed, and we are going to face these problems. So how do we think about facing these problems in a way that allows us to be true to our own values of democracy and human freedom, but allows us also to thwart the designs of those who would change this world against our wishes? And there is some pessimism that I sense in our own country, and certainly in my own students around the world, who think that America's best days are over, that we were once great, but we're now fading, falling from power, and weakening. And the prediction of some is that China is going to overtake the United States in global power at some point in our lifetime. And if the rise of China and India and Brazil to global power will mean an appreciable diminishing of America's influence in the world, and I don't buy it. And I disagree that this has to be our future, and we shouldn't want it to be our future. Because we know that we are flawed, we know that we make mistakes as a country, but we also know that we come from a great country whose power and whose values are really the hope of much of the rest of the world. So how do we maintain our power? And what's the good news that we might reflect upon at this meeting? First, let's look at the metrics of power and assess whether it's really true that the United States is fading. At the Kennedy School, we tell our students there's four ways to measure a country's power. There's political power, military power, a country's soft power, and our economic power. Politically, we are, as Madeleine Albright said when she was Secretary of State, we're the indispensable country. That sounds maybe a little bit arrogant, but most of us are Americans, so we're in the family. I can tell you from my own career, people may demonstrate against us. People may throw rocks and bombs at us. But when the chips are down, they call us. And they ask us for help. And I remember when I was working for President Bill Clinton and then Secretary Condoleezza Rice, when the Middle East was up in flames, they called us to be the intermediary. When the Chinese and Taiwanese were having a power struggle in the mid-1990s over the Taiwan Straits, Bill Clinton sorted it out. When we had that horrific terrorist attack in Mumbai in India in November of 2008, it was the United States Secretary of State who went and stood between the Indians and Pakistanis and said, please don't go to war with each other. You're both nuclear weapons powers. And she, Condoleezza Rice, was able to prevent that. And look at the performance, and look at the impact that Hillary Clinton has had. Around the world as our Secretary of State, the most traveled Secretary of State in our history. She's been everywhere, trying to prevent wars, trying to prevent problems from worsening, upholding the standards that we believe in, freedom, human dignity, rights for women. So we are the #1 political power in the world. How about military? Well, we're all taxpayers. We're spending about $700 billion a year on our national defense. It's too much. And the President and Congress have agreed to reduce that by $500 billion over the next 10 years, which is right. But still, even at reduced spending levels in 2013 out, we spend more than the next 15 or 20 countries spend combined. We are light years ahead in terms of military technology and the quality and training of our armed forces than any other country in the world. How about soft power? What does that mean? That's actually a concept pioneered by a colleague of mine at Harvard, Professor Joe Nye. And what he says is, countries have powers that are intrinsic to who they are. They have powers in their society. So a country has a soft power because their business community is strong. We've got a strong business community, and it's innovative. And a country has soft power if its values are respected and admired by the rest of the world. When we have our Constitution and Bill of Rights and the Declaration and the legacy of Lincoln and the legacy of Martin Luther King, that makes us a respected country. And we have our incredible university system, from Assumption and Clark and Worcester State and Holy Cross and WPI and Becker here in Worcester, to Texas Tech and UCLA and BC and Harvard, in Boston and Cambridge. We are the #1 education country in the world. And so we've got soft power. And we've also got economic power because we know we're the largest economy in the world. We know that we're the greatest high-tech country in the world. We know that we are the leader in nanotechnology and biotechnology. But we also know that in 2008, the economic foundations of our country shook a little bit. And we went into a recession. We lost some confidence, and we're not fully out of it at 7.8% unemployment, which is the latest figure. And that's the most important metric of power. And so if we want to fully be revitalized, we've got to lift up this economy and produce more jobs and have the business community lead us out of the recession that we've been in and that's beginning to happen. And just the report that both Richard Burke and Richard Kennedy have given about what you're doing here at Worcester, and frankly, I've been coming to Worcester since the early 1960s to drive down Main Street. It looks a lot different than it did 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. It's more vibrant. And there's more hope here for economic growth. So I believe that's one reason we should be confident, because we are still powerful, and we ought to be powerful a generation ahead. Here's a second reason. We're powerful because we have friends in the world. We have alliances. Our biggest rival is going to be China. China has 0 allies in the world. None. Not a single country pledges to defend China. China has one friend it can rely on through thick and thin, North Korea, which is really a millstone right around China's neck. Who do we have? We have the NATO alliance. I had the honor to serve there as ambassador to President Bush. 28 countries that say, if you are in trouble, we will back you up. And on 9/11, I was in Brussels at NATO. And the next day, the NATO alliance voted unanimously that they would go to war with us, and they did. And they're all still serving with us in Afghanistan. And in East Asia, the most vital part of the world, Australia, South Korea and Japan are our treaty allies, and the Philippines and Thailand and Singapore and Malaysia and Indonesia and Vietnam, ironically, for those of us who remember that war, are all our strategic partners. And we have a looming, big strategic partnership with India. So it's easy to look at numbers and say, China's growing at this percent, it's going to overtake us in GDP. But look at the real facts here. We have a world of friends and allies and alliances that support the United States, and China does not. Third reason to be optimistic and hopeful just before the holidays is that we are the leaders of the knowledge economy. It's why the universities in Worcester, particularly WPI, given its technology base, are so important to the economy of central Massachusetts. It's why 1 mile from Harvard down Massachusetts Avenue in Cambridge is a place called Kendall Square, which has basically been now built up as one of the world leaders in biotechnology because of MIT and because of the ideas coming out of the heads of the men and women there and the brilliance of our innovation economy. It's no longer the smokestack industries that attracted the Irish and the Italians and the Greeks and the Lithuanians and the Brazilians to come to central Massachusetts. It's the knowledge economy that your universities here will build and lead directly to a different economy for the 21st century. That's a reason to be hopeful. And fourth and finally, another reason why I'm optimistic about the United States, because we do believe in human freedom and dignity. And our largest competitor doesn't. And I don't mean to turn this into a US-China slugfest. China's a partner in many ways, and we have to live in peace with China. But China is seeking to diminish America's role in the world, and its government does not believe in human liberty. It doesn't believe in human rights. It doesn't believe in religious rights, and we do, and we are trusted around the world because of that central fact. So I don't think we ought to be pessimistic. I know that people are tired, understandably, from the two land wars. We've never tried to fight two land wars simultaneously. We've just done it. It's the longest period of continuous war in the history of our republic, and we're just about through it when the troops come home in 2014. And I know that China